Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Helen Zhang. I'm the opinion editor with the Oregonian and a member of the editorial board. And I'm talking with Commissioner Amanda Fritz and Bob Sallinger of the Portland Audubon Society to learn a little bit more about the charter amendment that is going before voters this November. And I'm wondering if Commissioner Fritz, if you wouldn't mind starting off by telling us a little bit about what the amendment's about.
We'll start with apologizing if my co-worker cat enters the conversation.
I thought I saw a little cat tail.
Yeah. The challenges of working from home. Thank you very much. Yes, so this is a pretty basic charter amendment to make it clear that the council and the community gets to choose how to use Water Bureau properties outside of the Bull Run closure area and how to spend Water Bureau funds. So there's a number of properties that previously were fenced off, and under Commissioner Randy Leonard, the fences were taken down and sometimes a picnic bench was put on them. And the city got sued to say that if that happens, previously, if the Water Bureau property is fenced, then the Water Bureau can use Water Bureau funds to mow the grass around the tank. If you take the fence down and allow the public to use that grass, then a lawsuit said that Water Bureau funds can no longer be used for it, and general fund has to be used. So that doesn't make any sense to me. It also doesn't make any sense to me that an individual commissioner was allowed to make that decision by themselves. And so another thing that this charter amendment would do would ensure that the whole city council has to make decisions about Water Bureau properties and Water Bureau funds. When we referred the ballot measure unanimously from the council, we set in place a binding city policy that, should it pass, there will be a public process to decide which properties can be used by the public and what those uses can be, and those things will be put in city code. So there would still be safeguards to make sure that Water Bureau funds are spent appropriately. There would be annual reporting to the council every year and to the public. And the Portland Utility Board will be involved in the process to decide which properties can be used. And essentially, it makes sure that Water Bureau customers and the City Council get to choose what to do with Water Bureau property and Water Bureau funds.
Give me an idea about of what kinds of properties we're talking about.
Well, we currently have 7 what we call hydroparks. They're small pocket parks in neighborhoods, mostly in neighborhoods that are parks deficient, and many of them in neighborhoods with many communities of color and low-income people living. So the 7 hydroparks are the kind of thing that we're talking about. So there's the Sabin Community Garden, for example. There's the Hazelwood property that has picnic benches and allows a community garden. So those kinds of properties are what we're talking about. As I said, there is a binding city policy that the specific properties will be set into city code. So this charter amendment doesn't give the commissioner in charge or the council unlimited power to do what they want with Water Bureau properties and funds. It says that there's going to be a process to have that decision made.
And what is the current cost, in terms of, for instance, maintaining those hydroparks that will now be transferred to the water, or could be transferred to the Water Bureau?
The current cost is about $11,500 a year. So that's not a very large amount, and that would not have an impact on rates. The other component of this, though, is that the Water Bureau funds would be allowed to do Americans with Disabilities Act improvements on these properties, because if they are accessible to the public, they should be accessible to everyone in the public and not only those who are able to walk and otherwise use them. So this, the council could, after the public process, choose to spend money for the ADA improvements. We had a general fund request in this year before COVID struck, and that was for $1.5 million over 5 years. Again, that amount of investment over 5 years would not increase the rates, but that's what it would take to bring all of these properties so that they are compliant with the law.
And the 11,500, I think you said, that's for all of them, or is that per park?
No, that's for the 7 hydroparks that are listed on the park's website.
Are there other properties that you have in mind that could be potentially open for, or are being used by the public?
Well, one that we're not considering is Powell Butte. That really is more like a real park. It's huge, and I think that that would be appropriate to keep with general fund money. There's one called Dodge Park, which is just outside of the Bull Run watershed, and that is used by cyclists from Portland and others for boat access to the Sandy River. And that one also, the choices there is we can fence it off and not allow anybody to use it, or we would, if we continue to allow day use or overnight use, we would have to do Americans with Disabilities Act improvements. And so again, that would be a decision to be made in this future process by the future council.
Bob, can you tell me a little bit about why you're supporting this?
Sure, and I apologize if there's noise in the background. A truck just pulled up with its radio blasting, so my apologies for that. We think this is a great program. We think this is really a really wonderful use of these sites that are already owned by the Water Bureau. They're in neighborhoods. Historically, they've been fenced off, and so basically, a fence around the edge of the property. The neighborhoods had the burden of having these sites in their midst, but they didn't have any of the benefits. And so really, they would just take up several lots and be sitting there in the middle of the neighborhood with these grassed, barren fields around them that the public couldn't access. So we thought it was a really wonderful idea when the city started opening them up, pulling back the fences, putting in picnic areas, swing sets, allowing people to use them for community gardens, allowing a little bit of naturescaping, that kind of thing. And they've turned into these incredible community amenities. And oftentimes, as Commissioner Fritz mentioned, in neighborhoods that are underserved. And so from our perspective, it's taking an asset that was already in the city's possession and allowing the public to get maximum use out of it. And we do believe that a public works agency ought to be able to use their sites in that way, that that it shouldn't just be that they are in the middle of your neighborhood, but they're not providing, maximizing the services that they could provide. And I think this really gives the Water Bureau the ability to do that. We also feel that the ADA issue is critically important, that, if we are going to have access to these sites, they ought to be accessible to everybody. So that piece is really important to us as well. But really what we see is that, it's not a huge program at all. It's just taking these assets that are already in public possession and making them more useful, not just making them a liability, frankly, for the neighborhoods that they're in.
So one question I have, and this is probably for you, Commissioner Fritz, there have been a lot of valid concerns over the years about how ratepayers' money is being used. And while the amount that you're talking about is relatively small, is there, I guess, what would you say to water ratepayers about, that money that's going to be used, that's used for buying water, is going to what could be very much a general fund purpose? I mean, if you're having, general public access for these parks and, making investments to make them understandably accessible by all, why is that not something that should be a general fund expense versus people paying for their monthly or their quarterly water bill?
Because they're Water Bureau properties, and frankly, they're good publicity for the Water Bureau. As Bob said, when the tank is fenced off behind barbed wire and there's no public access there, it's not particularly attractive or useful for the neighborhood. And I find drinking water completely fascinating. It's difficult, except when something goes wrong, like a boil water order, to get any kind of publicity for our delicious Bull Run water. And so letting people know that these are they're in public ownership, they should be enjoyed by the public, and that the Water Bureau wants to be a good partner in the community, I think that's really valuable.
And are there steps that the Water Bureau is taking to kind of mitigate the just the increasing cost of water service?
I'm sorry, there was a truck going by. Could you say it again, please? Sorry.
I guess I'm wondering, what is the Water Bureau doing to control the cost of water service to Portlanders? I mean, I think that is a concern that people have, that their water bills that they're seeing every 3 months are pretty sizable.
We are very mindful of that. And frankly, Commissioner Fish did a lot of work to restore confidence in the Water Bureau, to make sure that ratepayers' money is being spent wisely. And every year there's a very robust discussion at the council over any rate increase, whether it could be reduced, how could it be reduced, are there vacant positions? There's a lot of scrutiny, as there should be, into how the utilities spend the ratepayers' money. And so that will continue. As I said, this actually gives more oversight because it requires the council and it requires these uses to be set in code, rather than it being an individual commissioner saying, well, I think this particular one looks like we could take the fence down.
Great. I think I'm out of questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that, or emphasize, or anything I haven't asked?
Well, we certainly need to spend ratepayers' money appropriately and for purposes that are related to the Water Bureau, to the Water Bureau and its properties. This clarifies that in the council. There's many other calls on the general fund, public safety, parks, as you mentioned. Those can only be funded with general fund. They cannot be funded with ratepayers' money. And so I think this is an appropriate correction and clarification.
Thank you
And I
very
think
much.
if I could just add something as well, you know, I consider Audubon a watchdog agency. We certainly push the city hard on a lot of issues. We've worked with the Oregonian on that many times. And so we don't hesitate to push them when we think money's being misspent. To me, this is a very small adjustment that we think is very reasonable within the charter of the Water Bureau. It doesn't open things wide open. It's not expansive. It's a very limited piece that they lost in the lawsuit, but which I think makes sense to restore in the charter, because really, again, these are already in the neighborhoods. They were mowing them and maintaining fences and doing all kinds of things that did not create any benefit for the community, especially the local community. And this allows them to get back to making sure that where those sites exist, they are providing benefits. They're, again, not a burden to that neighborhood, but a benefit to them. And it's meeting so many very important objectives in terms of equity. These are 5 of the 7 are in underserved neighborhoods. In terms of making them accessible to everybody with the ADA pieces, in terms of food security, where these community gardens are popping up. And, you know, I'll just speak to one that's down the street from my house, the Sabin Water Park. I live in a very great neighborhood and not a lot of great park access. And I'm amazed to have seen that site converted from something that was, you know, I went by constantly and just marveled at the fact that here's this huge site with these fences and these barren green lawns, and 2 giant green water towers sticking up. That I agree. I think the infrastructure is cool. Now it's this incredibly beautiful site with this massive community garden, a couple of picnic tables, a swing set. It's constantly activated. It's really serving a wonderful use for minimal amount of funds. And I think it does need to be within the Water Bureau. You know, to get to your last question, I really feel that it is important that the Water Bureau have the ability, if they own these sites, to improve them in a reasonable way with real oversight by council to benefit the community. I don't think it should be coming through other sources. I think that's actually part of the responsibility of maintaining a site like this, is to make it as publicly friendly as possible. Not in an unreasonable way, not to add ridiculous things, but simply the idea that you pull back the fences and you allow people in to do the things that the community cares about on those grounds seems to me to be a very small and reasonable change with very, very tangible benefits.
And Bob mentioned watchdog. I did also want to say, although the Portland Utility Board, which is our official oversight body, they're not allowed to endorse a ballot measure that the council refers. They did vote to recommend the referral of the ballot measure. And I think one of their members said it the best. It should be the ratepayers and the city council that make the decisions about Water Bureau properties, not affluent lawyers.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Again, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. We hope people will support the ballot measure.
I'll talk with you soon.
Bye.